Listen to this chord from Dream Theater. Welcome to a progressive metal episode of
Keith Horn's Chord of the Week.
In 2019, Dream Theater released their 14th studio album, Distance Over Time, and upon first hearing it, I loved every single song on the record. There are plenty of moments to talk about and focus on in this album, but since this is a chord-forward channel, I thought I would look at one chord in particular from the song Pale Blue Dot, this one. And here's what it is. It's an E-flat augmented triad over an F10 interval, so an F10th. So how we can think of this as, we can think of it a couple different ways, right? I think of it as being based on a whole tone scale. There's only two whole tone scales, right? So a C whole tone and a D-flat whole tone. That covers all 12 chromatic pitches. In a C whole tone is technically a D whole tone, an E whole tone, an F sharp, and an A flat and a B flat. They're all the root, and they're all the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. It's the nature of a symmetrical scale. So there's only two of them. This chord is built off of, I'm gonna say, the D flat whole tone scale. So three of those notes give you this E flat augmented triad, and two of the other three, F and A, give you this chord, which is a 5-part whole tone based chord. I can't help but think that this is actually a nod to Steely Dan's Asia. I did another video on what I called the Asia chord, which was this section here. And even though the chord is a B minor 11, it's the same structure. You just have the same kind of single note, not single note, but there's 5 notes. 2T chord over and over again, the same chord accompanying a pretty great drum solo. You know that Dream Theater was in part influenced by Steely Dan, but that's for another video and another conversation, but I think it's fun to point out the similarities. Anyway, now I'm sure some of you will see this chord as an F9 with a flatted fifth. And you're right, it is that. I tend not to think of it that way, mostly because it's not used in a dominant function. But yes, it is an F9 flat 5 or F9 sharp 4 or raised fourth or lowered fifth, whatever terminology you want to use, whatever helps you remember the chord. I tend not to think of it that way, mostly because of how it's used or similar chords are used in other contexts. For example, Debussy used whole tone based chords, whole tone based harmonies all over in his music. And a lot of his harmonic vocabulary comes from variations of the whole tone scale. Here's a short segment from Debussy's La Mer from 1905. And if I slow this down, I'll play the whole phrase slowly. We start with F augmented over B. That's 4-part whole tone harmony. Walks up to G augmented, A augmented, all over B, back down to G. And then we move chromatically. F sharp augmented over C, over a tritone of F augmented. Then it just goes F sharp augmented, Then it drops to F augmented over C sharp, so just C sharp augmented. Then it does this again. A flat augmented over D and B augmented over F. I know that's a lot of augmented triads and a lot of information. Let me play the whole phrase. So both pieces, even though they were written and released 100 years apart, they're both using whole tone based harmony. This chord also shows up in the score for Wicked, in a chord that I like to call the green chord, because... And here we have an A augmented over G. Same exact type of harmony we hear in the other two pieces. Right? A augmented, and then a borrowed note outside of A augmented, a G that comes from the G whole tone scale, or in this case, the exact same whole tone scale as Dream Theater. And here's Wicked. I score a lot of animation, and I find that chords like this come in really handy. Here's an example of an episode from Muppet Babies, episode 327. Here I used a C augmented over F sharp. So you can think of it as augmented over tritone, right? The tritone of the C augmented. And I used it to suggest I'm trying to remember what was going on in the episode. I think all of the Muppet Babies were really annoyed with Rizzo. That's what it was. They're really annoyed with Rizzo. So this harmony, plus the orchestration that includes this muted trombone that's really silly, it really gets across the fact that they're annoyed with him. They're just like, come on, man. That's sort of what that sound is. So it's a fairly common chord in film scoring, especially in like children's animation. That's where I primarily work, in that space, in a lot of the music I write. And I use this type of harmony quite a bit for a lot of different scenarios. And it tends to work for annoyance pretty well. But I find it interesting how the exact same chord or chord structure in Dream Theater gives this sense of like suspended tension. Right? And in Debussy, it's like this floating dizziness kind of thing. I think that's mostly due to the chromatic movement of those augmented triads in Debussy that gives you that dizzying feeling. But it's important to note that it's the exact same chord as Wicked, as Dream Theater, and as Muppet Babies. I like to point out the use of harmony in different contexts because as much as I am a harmony head, right? And I'm a chord nerd, and if you're watching this, you're probably a chord nerd too, and you love to just figure out what they are. It's one of my favorite things to do. Figure out what a chord is and go, oh, that's interesting, and then talk to people about it. But using this exact same harmony in different contexts, it shows that harmony doesn't stand alone, right? That tempo, dynamics, orchestration, instrumentation can completely change the effect that the exact same harmony has. So that's the pale blue dot chord. At least from my memory, that's what I'm calling it, is the pale blue dot chord. That's the song that it comes from. And I've always loved Dream Theater. I haven't fished a lot around in their music yet. I just started fishing for chords in Dream Theater. I'm sure I'll find some more, and I look forward to diving deeper into their catalog and fishing out some more interesting chords.
Yeah. Who this? This beat. Yo, who this? Yo, who this? Who this?